I just want to firstly introduce Sir Nick, who's my boss, and it's the reason why I've got a job, which is great. And it's also the reason why we've been able to access a certain type of projects throughout the 40 years history of the office. And he's determined to not open offices around the world because he likes to go around the world, but is to find the right project for us to do with our methodologies and chase it and try to win it. And that's how we ended up having offices in 5 different locations in 4 different continents. And at the moment, what happened is that the office developed in a partnership, open partnership, where 17 different partners, which are these guys, operate in a fairly flatline democracy, which with all its troubles around the world. And the reason I'm saying that is because I'm not one of them. So I'm here to present my work that is, in a way, permitted and allowed and based on their work and their success. And this is the kind of stuff we do. So if you think of GRIMSHAW, normally I guess you think of funky-looking high-tech structures, bubbles, and big underground stations and airports, which is what we do mostly. But also, I work in all the little boxes because I don't like doing big things. So I'll try to do stuff that are not the core of the office. So I work on commercial, residential, and in this case, I'm here to present this master plan. So we're going to describe how we, Alberto and I, who have studied together in Mendrisio at the Accademia di Architettura, territorial planning, how we interacted on this project to try to find a new way to plan the territory. And so this is where Tirana is, somewhere down south, a little bit east than Italy, and it's a very incredible city. I guess I may spoil a little bit of what's going to come next. So I'm not going to say too much about this, but it's kind of a flat piece of land surrounded by hills and mountains and ragged mountains. And when we won this competition in 2012, the project was the key opportunity for the city to establish a new way of growing and re-establishing itself as a properly planned modern city. And the 3 things that you see up there, so the mosque, the hammam, and the bakery, which were the heart of a kind of Ottoman settlement that founded Tirana, are really no longer there. The mosque is in part still there, but everything else is being wiped through the tumultuous history of Tirana, of communist and fascist and all this kind of stuff, which have left a very important mark. But we were asking ourselves the question, so what are we going to do? You know, we don't have a political agenda. We are designers. We want to deliver interesting places to live in a city. And so we were given a site. At the time, the municipality was about 10 kilometers square worth of boundaries. And we were given a site of about 4 kilometers square to come up with a strategy. And the most striking things of this was that there was a straight line crossing the city, which is this boulevard that Stefano was mentioning, kind of started by the Italians, progressed by the communist regime, and then abandoned. And so we took that, and that was the core of the competition. So we had to do something with this boulevard, and we kind of developed it in a very linear fashion, which was very different than every other entry. And then we actually emphasized, a lot more than other people, this 8 kilometer of river that went from, it's only 8 kilometers because it starts at the entrance of the city and it ends at the exit of the city. Obviously the river is much longer, but in this transition, the river changes from a mountain river that comes down from these gorges and stones and really wild to a flatland river. So we took that as an opportunity. And I guess the way we're going to talk about it today is that architects took this as opportunity to define a future, right? So we established visions, and engineers actually have to deal with it in the ground. And so our methodology was, what can an engineer learn from an architect with a big long-term future, and what we architects can learn from an engineer to establish an urban program. And this is what's coming next. I'm not going to spoil it, but the idea that the city was restructured started when the project that I won, and now is changing again. So it will be another challenge for whoever is involved next. And we called our approach a constraint-driven approach, which is the synthesis of what I was saying. So we went to the ground, learned the things that we couldn't change in terms of physical things and also political things and social things, and we tried to kind of bring this global idea of big architects who do stuff all around the world, and then sit in Tirana with the locals and understand what it meant for them. And the bits that met, we used to establish our project and our philosophy. And so there was a lack of, the boulevard was very important. We picked that, very straight, very formal, it's a symbol of a continuation of their history, of the history of the city. Urban space and green space was a miss in the city, so we established that. Pedestrian people in Tirana are out all the time. They walk around all the time. It's very dense, very bubbly city, even in the not so quiet areas. So, there's very distinct areas like epi-bubbly, and some are dog chasing you bubbly, which is an interesting kind of contrast. And so Alberto, in Italian, will tell you what we learned from the river.
Buonasera, mandami avanti tu, Paolo, grazie. Come ha detto Paolo, la collaborazione tra queste due competenze professionali, quella dell'urban planner e dell'ingegnere, nel caso di Tirana, ha richiesto fin dal primo momento la necessità di un approccio che superasse le strette competenze disciplinari. Un approccio cioè che non fosse quello tradizionalmente impiegato nella pianificazione, che vede cioè gli specialisti, la categoria degli ingegneri, operare sui sistemi infrastrutturali e corridoi fluviali, e poi gli architetti elaborare il piano, la visione di sviluppo della città. Per una città come questa, Tirana, in cui questa è una porzione del fiume Tirana, il grado di sviluppo urbano ha così rotto i confini, rotto i limiti della città tradizionale, tanto da arrivare proprio sul bordo del fiume. Anzi, le dinamiche sociali che vanno proprio a intensificare la vita del corridoio fluviale sono tra le più variegate, le più disparate. Andiamo dalla gente più povera, dalle popolazioni nomade, ai Rom, alle popolazioni che non trovano occupazione permanente dentro nella città, fino ad arrivare alle industrie, alle industrie pesanti, la metallurgia, la produzione di manufatti per l'edilizia, che alimenta la fabbrica urbana che sta alle sue spalle. Quindi oggi la condizione del fiume Tirana è un po' quella che vedete in queste fotografie, in cui il fiume fa quello che deve fare, cioè l'apparato escretore della città, butta fuori tutto quelli che sono i sottoprodotti della vita urbana, della produzione urbana. E quindi non si poteva usare il metodo tradizionale dell'approccio ingegneristico, cioè quello di un'analisi dettagliata, topografica, la modellazione degli eventi di piena, la definizione delle aree di rischio, quindi laddove si può costruire, dove non si può costruire, perché in un contesto urbano come questo la città è più forte, cioè la velocità con la quale si occupano questi spazi, con la quale si vanno a densificare queste aree, supera ogni capacità di programmazione e di pianificazione. E quindi con il team degli architetti è nata subito l'esigenza di ibridare i nostri saperi, cioè di condividere non tanto le competenze specialistiche, ma il modo di guardare al fiume, il modo di leggerlo, di interpretarlo, di lasciarci suggestionare da questo ecosistema urbano che è estremamente ricco, estremamente potenzialmente prolifico di novità, e quindi di cogliere non solo tutti i limiti che questo sistema ha, che come potete immaginare sono l'inquinamento, di occupazione abusiva di suoli, di estrazione abusiva di materiale dal corridoio, di limitazione dei valori ecosistemici, quanto piuttosto quella di trasformare questo luogo in un potenziale ambito di trasformazione, cioè coglierne tutte le potenzialità che rappresentava. E quello che abbiamo fatto è stato appunto di ragionare in termini di corridoi, in termini di margini, di bordi, di confini, usando gli stessi schemi. Cioè il boulevard è un asse, come asse è il corridoio fluviale. Il boulevard è una serie di episodi, come sono episodi quelli che capitano lungo il fiume. Il boulevard è un luogo di incontro, di addensamento, esattamente come lo è un fiume. Quindi nello studio del corridoio fluviale, di quello che erano le sue potenzialità, ci siamo lasciati reciprocamente influenzare dalla ibridazione di questi concetti, cioè dal tentativo di fuggire da una pretesa un po' olistica di programmare tutto, di limitare tutto, di vietare tutto, di dare delle regole certe, quando piuttosto quella di lasciarci interrogare, di lasciarci provocare dalle dinamiche in atto e cercare di rintracciare dentro queste dinamiche che fanno la città, che la costruiscono, quali sono gli elementi che possiamo utilizzare per portare questo sviluppo verso delle direzioni condivise, delle direzioni che siano capaci di generare condivisioni, non fratture, di generare spazi di incontro e non spazi di segregazione. Quindi questo è stato un po' quello che l'ingegneria idraulica e l'urbanistica, quando si sono trovati attorno a questo fiume, hanno dovuto fare. Tant'è che ad esempio in quest'ultima foto del novembre, lo scorso novembre, si vede chiaramente come il progetto in un certo punto del fiume aveva previsto, era la linea rossa, il cambiamento in atto nei mesi intercorrenti tra lo studio, il progetto e l'esecuzione delle opere ha portato alla necessità di rivedere completamente lo schema e quindi anche il progetto stesso ha dovuto fare propri dei meccanismi per cui si sapeva già prima di iniziare i lavori che qualcosa nel frattempo sarebbe cambiato, che avremmo dovuto gestire l'incertezza, esattamente come nella costruzione della città e quindi questo ne ha dato la più ampia testimonianza e credo che sia l'originalità di questo approccio tra ingegneri ed architetti. Thank you, Paul.
Grazie. So, the interesting thing, I also wanted to add that Alberto is a very good engineer, and he did all the modeling, and he did all the technical design, and he made sure that we knew where the flood was going to go when the flood would come, and all these things, the data generated by the normal progress of an infrastructure project were underpinning the work. But the interesting thing for us is to kind of take our specific technical skills, you know, I make intensity numbers and foundation zones and flood zones, Alberto does that, but the way we try is talk about them in the thinking of the city, of this part of the city. So what does it mean for people? What does it mean for the urban space? And we found that a very interesting approach. And the very interesting thing that happens is that we started this job with the previous mayor. Politics in Albania are equally challenging as in most places in the world these days, but they're very ping-pong. So if you have a client on one side, then you can't work with the client on the other side when he comes up. And we were very lucky to have been on the ground, and I think the approach we used that was very focused on being on the ground allowed us to work very positively with the previous mayor as well as the new mayor who's now in charge of this, buying into our project and using it as, you know, a showcase of trying to change. So change is coming. This project outlasts mayors by tenfold because this project is going to take 20 years to come to become what us architects, and that's what I'm going to show you next, want to become, right? A kind of a long cultural, these should all be green, by the way, just squint and think it's green. You know, we do very sketchy renders and we think, oh, it's a natural environment where the fringe of the nature coming from the mountains come into the city, and we will solve this problem of the fact that the banks of the river are built with rubbish. We will solve the problem of the informal, read illegal, housing all along the banks of the river. We will solve the issue of there is no bridges, there is no road that get to the river. We will solve all this, and eventually we'll end up with a beautiful piece of natural environment that people can kayak in and find pebbles to cross and, you know, it will be a great asset for new development and all this kind of stuff, which is what urbanists and architects tend to do. You know, we just put a picture in the future and then work really hard to get there. And so this is an extract. Of course, we work with landscape designers that are not here today, but I obviously must credit them. So Turkit and Martin, very nice, pragmatic landscape people that deal with flood zones very well. And together we came up with this idea that, yes, the boulevard is the settling of the city, but the river has to be the idea of this new future way of understanding Tirana. Also because this river is called Tirana. And if you go to Tirana even now, you ask them why this city is called like this, they have no idea. They have no idea what the river is, actually, which is a bit strange. And so we kind of created a program understanding, so the border of this are in essence the flood zones that we learned by all the data that came out of Alberto's job, and that defined a space where the city couldn't be built as physical asset. So we leveraged that and turned it into building the city as a cultural green space. And then we designed it in a way that it can be implemented in whichever order and in whichever opportunity. Because obviously, if money is difficult in Italy, you can only imagine how difficult it is to get money in Albania, and this thing costs a lot of money. So we created a canvas with a designed opportunity for things to happen in whichever way they will find the way to happen. And so we created this idea of hubs and outdoor rooms, which obviously are the zone where the river tends to flood more, because that's where you can't put buildings for real. So there's this kind of double layer of everything. And this kind of ideas that the certain type of nature, so type of trees that deal well with being in the water a long time, type of reeds that prevent the water flow, they merge tactically, I would say, with the engineering of the river management. And that's how we defined our landscape program and our cultural program within it. And landscape architects always do pretty drawings, so I'm going to show you some pretty drawings. And we worked on sections, and the sections were very important because Tirana is pretty flat, but past the river, there's a hill. So the first elevation of the city happens kind of across the river. So we were really keen to understand how we could integrate a big road and get people to access the river at different points to ensure that this idea of parks and accessibility from the city, so in a vertical connection, was possible, as well as walking along the river, which is obviously a lot easier. And this kind of layering, and all these lines exist all along the river. They just move in relationship to each other's. And the elevation, so walking in the river, it's the place that floods. Walking by the river is the place that floods 1 in 100 years, so you can ensure that you can kind of use it as a corridor for cycling and proper kind of eco-commuting. And walking in the woodland is the place that never floods, so you can put cars in it. And we kind of ended up with this, you know, in a summary of high-density urbanity as a pivot, where the boulevard, the city kind of grows in density and height, and this really wild, or as wild as possible nature, because in our view is what represents the ethos of Tirana is pretty wild, right? And it's very close to actual natural wilderness. So we wanted to bring that into the city and represent physically this challenge that we had to face. So, and lastly, what we then learned from it, from our urban work, is that we learned that understanding patterns of events at ground, literally at ground level, on the ground and into the ground, is very important to understand the density dynamics that the city can live with. So we extracted these ideas, 4 different densities that became the ingredient of our plan for the larger portion of the city. And in an ideal world, they can be kind of experiments for replanning the whole city when it happens. Of course, this is now going to be turned out in a new project that you'll hear about in a while. But very shortly, we learned that the boulevard is kind of the city of representing itself, you know? There's a place where public building, open spaces, the importance of this capital city of a small but historic state in the center of Europe, with all its contrast, but also interesting survival of 3 different religions and lots of different type of politics that govern it. It's kind of, it needs a place to be representative of itself, and that's where the boulevard is. So big building, tall things, big parks, that kind of idea. But then, and it kind of could look like that. A bit kind of global looking, yeah? Apart from the pink color. And then there's eco-compact city, which is something that we're really interested in. So real kind of the right balance of density. You know, how close can we live together? And what is necessary for us to live close together? And this is something that actually Tirana is a very good example of, because they live really close together. And they managed to create interesting informal outdoor spaces in the courtyards that get opened up to the public and things like that that are not planned at all. So we really went around and walked around in places where probably we weren't really welcome to try to understand how dense this place could be. And so we think this is a good model, and we learned this and we exported it actually in a lot of other projects we're doing around the world. And you know, it's better when you have windows on the building, but never mind. And then there's the city edge, which is the fringes of the city that kind of open up towards the natural boundaries, in this case the river, where it becomes a bit more suburban, but with the density of, well, for me, living in London, this will still be denser than a normal London kind of environment. But you know, the buildings are opened up, they have their own gardens, but they are more, they have an understanding, a physical understanding of nature. So they see nature, they see the mountains, they see the river, they have walking access to these places, and they can be all around the city center. And lastly, there's this kind of agricultural park. So the idea that the edges of Tirana that we are now building on were the agricultural reserve of the city in this last planned iteration. So we're building with this system that allows the land to be still farmed, which is very common there. People have lots of gardens that they grow vegetables, and this is still a very common practice. And so we kind of enhanced that and made it into public space. So here the idea, all the green strips are communal farmland that basically you preserve bits of farmland, don't build on it, and let people appropriate and do the kind of, you'd call them allotment if you were in the UK. Here it'll probably be a lot more fluid and a bit anarchic, but you know, it's a kind of given the space for these things to happen. You know, don't detach the idea of food production from the planning of the city. That was the aspiration. And it still provides some density because the city is growing in an enormous space, and we didn't want the city to sprawl out. And because there is a couple of corridors where there is no boundaries, the real challenge for planning, if you don't give enough density close to the center, people will just go and build little houses everywhere. And we were really keen to understand that dynamic and give tools to the city politicians and planners to avoid that issue, which is an issue that it's, as you know, is all around the world, and you know, it's very difficult to tackle. And we ended up with this. So we then had to do a detailed plan only for a central part of it, so only for the boulevard and eco-compact city version of the densities that you see. And so there's this idea that the boulevard is the continuation of the image of the city, and is built by big commercial and public buildings. And in this iteration, which is now evolved, but there was a number of squares, and each square carried a density of a certain use. So there's a commercial square with all the shops, there is a judicial square because we had to design a new Palace of Justice, and so on. And lastly, we had an attempt of designing a building, which isn't really a building, that talks about architecture in a landscape, so it isn't really architecture or landscape, and is based on our collaboration and on data generated by engineers. So we tried to design something the way we thought we were working. And we ended up with this. This is at the cross between the river, the regenerated, clean water, free-flowing, beautiful mountain river, and the axis of the boulevard. So there's a very formal building that becomes a public space where people are formally brought to their newfound river Tirana that define their city, and they can swim in it because One courtyard with a river flowing through is inspired by the mountains, so it's got little trees and grass, and you know, you sit on a rock with your and you have the mountain experience. And the next door is inspired by the sea where the river goes. So instead of rocks, you have sand beaches and different type of plants and things. But the binding thing is that it's a kind of a fun place to freely engage with this newfound river. So we made a swimming pool out of fresh water. That's the idea. Now, I say we made a swimming pool, so this is still on our drawing and on our aspirations, right? So one day, we will make a swimming pool out of fresh water in the middle of Tirana or somewhere else. And that's all we wanted to say. So hopefully, you're going to have some good questions. Thank you.